So, what's a first generation i5 like at gaming? Let's find out today on Nelly's Nerd Cave. Welcome back to Nelly's Nerd Cave, and today what we're looking at is the first generation i5, and here we have an i5-650. This is an 1156 and runs at 3.2 gigahertz. It has a maximum TDP of 73 watts and has 2 cores and 4 threads. This was released in 2010, which makes this a 14-year-old CPU. Let's find out if this can game with some of today's modern graphics cards. So as with all my videos, we're going to look at the things that we generally don't change with our setups when testing. And first of all, we have the Kioxia Xperia for 80GB. Yes, this is the exact same drive that I used on the i3 series, and it's going to be the drive that I use for everything after this point. This is a 2.5-inch SSD. It's really cheap. It only costs about 35 English pounds. Really useful to have. Yes, it's 480GB, doesn't have many games on, but it's perfectly fine and functional for what I need it for when I'm testing. The other things that don't change is I'm going to have a set amount of RAM that I use. Now I'm going to have 16GB. Unfortunately, I can't use the same sticks every single time I do a test. So with the first generation, I'm using 4 individual 4GB sticks of RAM. Now, this is because of 2 things. One, the board that I'm using, the BioStar H55A+, has 4 slots for your RAM. However, each individual slot has a maximum capacity of 4GB, so I have to put 4GB in to make the 16GB of RAM. The second thing that's going to be the big issue is I don't have 4 identical sticks. I do have 4 similar sticks, but they're from different manufacturers. So what I do have is, first of all, I have 2. These are SK Hynix DDR3 4GB memories, and we also have 2 Kingston HyperRAM DDR3 4GB sticks. All 4 of these run at 1333 MHz. You'll notice they're both different colours. One's green, one's blue. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that they are paired up correctly. So I'm going to use the 2 red channels on here, which is channel A2 and B2 for my SK Hynix, and I'm using A1 and B1 for the Kingston memory. So that's 16GB of RAM. That's going to be the same throughout everything, just different types of RAM, maybe different speeds as well. The other thing that never changes, and the thing that I'm going to use, is going to be the cooler. Now this CPU cooler is the Thermalright Assassin King. It has a 120mm fan, and this fan is relatively silent for a cheap cooler. It has 6 heat pipes across the bottom, all copper lined, really good. And when I've done some benchmarking on other things such as server CPUs with in excess of 30 cores, this really holds up very, very well. It's very good and it's very cheap, and this was again £19.99 and was really good value for money. And like I said, I'm using the motherboard, that is the BioStar H55A+. I've had this since it was first released. A really good board. It's lasted very, very well. It's been taken apart and put together so many times. It's unbelievable, and it's a really good board to use for these types of tests. Now with all my benchmarking that I do, I'm using the same 3 graphics cards that I've used previously in my i3 series. I'm first of all using the MSI GTX 970. This is the Gaming Pro version. It is 4GB of GDDR5 and has a clock speed of 1253. It's a really good card. Again, I've had this since it first came out. It's quite power hungry and gets very warm, but performs very well, and we'll see that later on. This card came out in 2014 and is PCI Generation 3. The second card that I'll be using is this one, and this is the Palette GTX 1650. This is the Game Pro edition, and it's overclocked. Now, it still does have 4 GB of RAM, and this is 4 GB of GDDR6. It has a clock speed of 1410 and is PCIe Generation 3. Now, the remarkable thing about this card is it was released in 2020, and it's only got 4 GB of RAM. It's a pretty good card, but doesn't play all games at high at all. You'll tend to find that a lot of the games and a lot of the settings that I'm using are medium to help with this particular card. However, what sometimes happens is we have a little bit of a difference with the clock speeds. Even though this is overclocked, this tends to be a little bit slower than others at times. But this card is still sold today, and in my local PC world, it's sold with a 12100 processor, and it's classed as a gaming PC. This runs 1080p, low medium settings quite well. Anything higher, you're looking at something a bit bigger and better. And talking of bigger and better, we have the RTX 3060. This is the MSI Ventus 2X. This has 12 GB of GDDR6. It runs at 1807 MHz and is PCI Generation 4. This card was released in 2021 and is very capable of running some of these games at 1440p on high settings very easily, because it has oodles of memory on there that you can really rip into when you're playing games. What I'm also using is I'm using this monitor behind me. This is an MSI monitor. It runs at 145 Hz. It's a very capable monitor. However, it does have one flaw. It's only 1080p. Why have I chosen 1080p, I hear you cry? For the simple fact that according to the Steam survey that they have once a year, most people are still using 1080p gaming monitors as part of their setup. So I thought it was only fair that I use a similar monitor at 1080p and have a high refresh rate. This will then give all these graphics cards the best opportunity and the best outcomes that I can get for these. So, without further ado, let's get to the build. This video is brought to you by VIP SCD Key. If you head over there using my links in the description below, you'll find they offer cheap OEM Windows 10 and 11 keys for which you can use my discount coded links, which give you big discounts on the specified Windows keys. They also offer Office 2019, which you'll be able to get for only £28.28 using the code NNC2. Follow the links in the description below. Okay, so here are the test results. So starting off with 3D Mark Time Spy, you can see here that we have a frame rate of between 20 and 23 frames per second. And when we move into the max score, you can see that we have a 2460. That's very below average because the average is around about 2740 for this particular card. But again, this could be the actual processor that's holding it back. Now if we move on to the 1650, again in 3D Mark Time Spy, you can see that we actually have a drop in frame rates of between 15 and 19 frames per second. You can also see that the max score drops to 2329 compared to the previous older generation card of 2460. Again, the 1650 still has a big performance drop from its normal average score of 2691. Again, could be contributed to the fact that we have a old processor in there and the processor is just bottlenecking. Within Doom Eternal, we can see that we have between 92 and 117 frames per second, so it's scoring pretty well. If we move on to the RTX 3060, the 3D Mark Time Spy is up again between 30 and 39 frames per second, which is a real good increase. It has a max score of 2617. It's not much more than the 1650 or the 970, and it's well below its maximum average of 4232. If we move on to Doom Eternal again, we have a maximum frame rate of between 105 and 124. So we've increased our frame rates, but I think again it's been held back by that processor. So they have all the test results. So can an i5 first generation actually deal with gaming? Well, it can. Does it do it well? Not particularly. So what could we do to improve this? Well, really, there's nothing much we can do. RAM at that time didn't go much faster than 1333 megahertz. So really, we need to upgrade the platform. And upgrading the platform to something newer might help. Again, the next set of tests I'm going to be doing is with an i5 second generation, and there's tons of those on Facebook Marketplace. Lots of them all advertised as gaming. Now, the funny thing is that the more modern Palette 1650, which was only released in 2020, which is 4 years ago, actually performed worse than the GTX 970, which is a card from 2014. Now, the 970 is a good all-round card. It's still sold today as a really good gaming card, but again, it doesn't do very well with very high frame rates on different size screens like 1440p or 4K. However, it's very good at 1080p, as we've seen with the results. And the good thing is also that you could quite easily upgrade your computer. If you had an i5-650, for example, if you had one of these processors in a machine and you wanted to game on it, you could put an RTX 3060 in there with 12 gigabytes of GDDR6. It does work perfectly fine. You do get higher frame rates. Now, not sure it would work for every single game because I haven't tried every single game, but you do get a performance boost. Would I recommend this? If you were just starting out and you had very limited money, maybe, but unfortunately the upgrade paths for this are very limited. So I would say save your money and get something as modern as you possibly can. And you'll see as we go through the series that we'll be looking at some of the 6th, 7th, 8th generation processors, and you'll probably find that something like a 6th or 7th would be much better for an intermediate level, and we'll see that later, hopefully. If you'd like to support what I do, then don't forget to click the bell below and make sure you subscribe to my channel. If you'd really like to help, a lot of this is self-funded, and I am looking at being able to get better equipment and give you a better experience. So if you'd like to support me, buy me a coffee, follow the link below, and I'll also be starting off a Patreon site at some point once I've got my head figured around it. So until next time, I will see you all later.